Hello and welcome to Stories and Lessons. This is Tim Winnicky with Empowered Change Counseling and Education. Thanks for sharing your day with me. I'm really excited about today's episode. Today was my little brother's birthday. So what better way to celebrate his birthday than to tell some embarrassing stories about his childhood? Well, really it's our childhood. So my brother, my baby brother, is a 6'7", 250-pound giant. To give you some context on where that puts him in relation to me, I'm 6'1" and $190. We're 4 years apart, so growing up, I generally had the upper hand on him when it came to size and coordination. The only time we were in school together was elementary school because our age difference was so big. And generally speaking, violence wasn't a big part of how we related to each other. He was so much younger than me that it wasn't enough of a contest that there was much of a struggle that way when we were coming up. And I wasn't a violent kid. So there were 3 occasions where violence kind of got the better of us as kids. There was twice that Sean hurt me in pretty profound ways. We were horsing around both times, just playing. We weren't yelling, we weren't screaming. As far as I knew, we weren't mad at each other, and he managed to gash open my forehead. The interesting part of this is he did it in the same spot 4 years apart. One time he hooked a matchbox car up my head and caught it and left an inch-long gash. The other time we were playing in the backyard and he picked up a motorcycle windshield and whapped me across the head with it. I don't know of any other creatures on the planet that will do that kind of damage to each other when they're not fighting other than brothers. We weren't any different. The only time I ever put hurt on Sean that I remember was we were wrestling around. I think I was like 13 or 14, so he would have been, 9 or 10. And he couldn't win. We were wrestling, he got frustrated, and I probably let the match go a little long, and he racked me, kicked me right in the balls. And he got up and was clearly scared and ran. He ran off and hid, and I laid on the ground for what felt like forever. I just trying to calm down, trying to let the pain go. And any of you who have ever been racked know it's a building pain. It's always that moment when you recognize it's happened, and then there's a delay, and then the pain hits, and the pain just keeps getting worse for a while. So finally, I gave up on trying to calm down. I was furious, and I chased him down, and I beat the snot out of him. Gave him a bloody nose, probably a black eye. And after that, I felt horrible. I was really sad. I went home, and I ran into my room and I cried about it because I'd never hurt Sean before. Sometime later, Sean came home all disheveled and, bleeding a bit. And he goes to my mother and she goes, "What the hell happened to you?" And he starts snuffling and says, Tim beat me up. And then she proceeded to spank him, yelling about wanting grandkids because she asked him what he had done that I beat him up. So violence wasn't really part of our interactions as kids together. It wasn't a thing. I think there's a few reasons for that. The big one was that we were really close as kids. The house was pretty chaotic. There was a lot of parties going on. And generally speaking, if Sean had a nightmare, it was my bed he crawled into. He didn't go to mom and dad. He came to me. When my mother was at some of her worst, Sean would come and hide in my room with me. I was the one he came to. I was the one he looked to for protection. And that mattered to me. It was always kind of the role I took on between the two of us. And there's some good reasons for that. I mean, one, I'm the big brother. I don't know a big brother that doesn't like to feel protective of their siblings on some level. But the other thing is that Sean was huge his whole life. He was basically a giant. And because of that, as a little kid, everybody always thought he was a few years older than he was. So people treated him like he was stupid. Other kids picked on him a lot. And it was all because they just assumed he was slow. I mean, imagine, if you will, you're an adult, you're looking at a 4-year-old, and he's acting like a 4-year-old, but he's big enough to be a 6 or 7-year-old kid. So he's talking like a 4-year-old, he's looking like a 7-year-old. So of course you're going to, think he's slow or wonder what's going on. So I would get really defensive of Sean. And kind of a good story that I like about that one was I was bullied a lot in elementary school. I was pretty tall. I never had a point in school that I remember not being one of the tallest kids, but I was bone thin. I was just super scrawny. But for whatever reason in my mind, I thought I was bigger than everybody else and I didn't want to hurt anybody. So I just took beatings. People would bully me, people would hit me, and I would let them. And I think part of it too was I was just afraid of violence generally. I didn't really want to get violent. So there was a kid, he was a year ahead of me, and he bullied me all the way through school. I think most of us have that bully, right? And Sean is now in school and he's in the 1st grade, and we're walking home and my bully bullied Sean. And I don't really remember what happened next. I just kind of remember coming to, and I had him by like the neck up against a tree. And I told him that if he ever put hands on my brother again, I was going to hurt him. And a week later, like kids do, he was back to picking on me and everything went back to our old pattern, and he never touched Sean again. That instinct never has stopped. I'm pushing 40 years old. And my brother's in his 30s. And if somebody bothers him, if he tells me something's going on, I immediately kick back in to an idiot that's going to go hit somebody over his brother. It's the dumbest instinct I have as an adult, but I think it comes from a pretty solid place. This kind of gets more interesting as the two of us get older, right? In our elementary school, it wasn't too bad. It was, neighborhood kids we grew up with and knew. So the relationships and dynamics were pretty well laid out. And yeah, there was bullying, but it was a black eye every now and then, or getting spit on or something. It wasn't violence that was really hurtful. It was embarrassment, if that makes sense. It was, childhood dominance. When I got to middle school, the world changed a bit. I bust out, and all of a sudden there were kids from multiple neighborhoods, and we lived in College Park, so there were some rougher neighborhoods, and there weren't a lot of white neighborhoods. So me and my brother, by the time we got to our middle school, were some of the only white kids there. And what ended up happening was I got jumped a lot. Middle school, I don't know a single person who, when they look back at their academics, are like, yeah, my favorite time of school was middle school. I think middle school just kind of sucks for everybody. But I got beaten pretty badly in middle school. I remember it was one time these 5 kids jumped me, and I know it was pretty bad because my ribs hurt for a few weeks afterwards. So I think they might have cracked a rib or something. And generally speaking, the way that went is anytime I got jumped, I just kind of curled up and took a beating. There's not too many people that can take on 4 or 5 kids or 4 or 5 peers, right? It doesn't really matter who you are. Well, turns out that for Sean, that was a very different experience. Sean wasn't a violent kid. He wasn't a violent guy. He knew how big he was. And I think as a kid, he was pretty careful with it because he was clumsy with it. I mean, he was much bigger than his coordination allowed for. But by the time he got to middle school, he was kind of done taking anybody's crap. And I don't know how it was for other people's schools, but for mine, the worst fights always happen in the last week of school, right? The kids that are going to go and really brawl and really do some violence are like, oh, what are they going to do? Suspend me? Well, there's only a week left of school. It'll be fine. So that's, like, for instance, that's when I got those ribs cracked up, was the last week of school. For Sean, I was still at this point feeling pretty defensive of him. Now I'm in high school, I'm doing mosh pits, I've got some big friends, and violence isn't as foreign to me. And he's still my baby brother. If there's anything in the world I'm going to get violent over, it's going to be him. So he comes home and, I was like, hey man, how was your day? And he's like, it was all right. Some kids tried to jump me. And immediately my hackles go up. I'm like, who, what, who are these kids and where they live? Where they at? What's going on? And he just kind of looks at me like I'm sweet. And he's like, man, whatever. It was nothing. It's fine. They ran. And I didn't have it in me then to acknowledge that my brother made a few kids his own age run from him in an argument. But years later, I asked him, I was like, man, how do you fight 4 or 5 people? And he's like, man, you don't fight 4 or 5 people. You grab the first one that gets to you and you throw them at the other 2, and then they run away. It's not really a fight. As far as I know, my brother has never lost in a physical altercation with anybody else. He's never started one that I'm aware of, but he certainly wasn't letting anybody else finish a fight anymore. If somebody bothered him, he stopped them. And even then, even after that moment of my brother going, 5 people my age ran from me, it didn't click that he was big enough to take care of himself. He was still my baby brother. I was still really defensive of him. And a big part of that was by the time that I was a teenager and Sean was an adolescent, our household at home was really rough. My mother had been in an industrial accident. Her mental health was really in a dark place, and home wasn't all that safe anymore for us. Dad did what he could. Mom coped as best she could, but it wasn't a place that felt safe or was where we wanted to spend any time. So my father made me take Sean anytime I left the house for the most part. I'm not exaggerating when I say that until my senior year, my brother had been out on more dates with me than any girl I dated. He had to come everywhere with me. And that didn't help my image of him. I saw him kind of this paunchy, goofy, quiet kid. But who wouldn't be quiet and awkward at 12 hanging out with 16 and 20-year-olds? Most of my friends were older than me, and my brother was in tow. And so the image I always had of him was this socially awkward kind of doofus. And that's who people pick on. That's who people make it hard for. That vision of him didn't allow me to see him as growing into the man he was becoming. And that didn't really change. I never really allowed him the space, and he was never really with his own peers to showcase his charm, his wit, and what he had going on. Instead, he was always in my shadow. So then at 19, I moved out to Colorado and left Sean there in high school. And I'd been gone about a year. And I called in to check in at home with him. And I was like, hey man, how's it going? He's like, whatever man, look, I think I can take you now. And immediately when he says that, my sphincter tightens because I know he's figured it out. Of course he can take me. At this point, I'm 19 and I'm 6'1" and $180. And yeah, I play a little rugby and do some mosh pits. My brother at that point, at 16 years old, was 6'5" and 230 and had never lost a fight. But I can't just acknowledge that, right? I'm the big brother. I can't just say, yeah, you probably can. Instead, I'm like, all right, man, whatever. We'll see what happens when I get home. Click. Hang up the phone. So then the whole month leading up to me going home for Thanksgiving, I'm trying to figure out what to do about this. How am I going to take him? This hasn't come up since we've been size peers, and we're certainly not peers anymore. He's bigger than me. So I get it in my head that I've basically got to surprise him. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to take him in a stand-up fight, so I've got to use some guile and trickery. So sure enough, my opportunity comes up right when I pull up at home. A buddy of mine came and got me from the airport. I go home. I look at the side of the house, and Sean is out on the yard playing his guitar in the backyard. And I'm like, all right, now's my chance. He's not going to let anything happen to that guitar. If I get him now, I got a shot. So my plan was to go running up the side of the house as quiet as I could be, to vault the fence and spear tackle him and wrestle him into the ground and assert my brotherly dominance over him. I mean, I think that was a pretty good plan overall. It went real bad. So instead of this graceful panther-esque leap over the fence, I catch my foot and trip. And rather than like hitting the ground and having the ability to spear tackle him, instead, I kind of just latch onto his shirt and haul him to the ground with me while I'm tripped, awkward, and clumsy. We roll around for a minute on the ground, and I find myself on top of my brother. And I look around, and there's two of his buddies there, and my buddy that drove me is watching. And I got him on the ground, and I'm holding one of his arms, and I'm straddled on top of him. And I notice that he's only using one arm to try to fight me off. I think he managed to hand the guitar off to a buddy. And he's just laying there, literally laying on one arm and fake struggling. Oh, you got me, man. Jeez. Get off me. And I look around and I notice that there's other people around. And, I'm 19 at this point. My masculinity cannot take the idea that my baby brother let me want to fight in front of other people. So I get up and I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought. You remember that. And I go inside and I spend the rest of the day thinking about it. And I realize, yeah, he definitely let me win. And I'm trying to figure out why. He's the one who, called and said, I think he can take you now. So this clearly matters to him. And then I'm thinking about it overnight and I catch him the next morning and he's getting out of the shower, right? He's in a towel and topless. And I look at him and I was like, hey man, thanks for letting me feel like the big brother yesterday. He's like, what do you mean? Well, I know you let me win. And he went beet red from his waist all the way to his hairline. And he looks down and he kind of shuffles his feet. And he's like, man, I didn't think you noticed. And at that moment, I had never felt more love from my brother. He knew it was important to me to win, to be seen and to feel like the big brother. And he let me. And this is a guy who's never lost a fight. This is a guy who is incredibly physically capable that way. And he just proved to me in that moment, at that time, that on a certain level, he was more of a man than I was. Because I don't know at that point in my life that I could have let him win. And I re-looked at him again, and the goofy, pudgy kid that I grew up with wasn't really there. Like, he was 16, he was tall, he was big, and yeah, he still has a baby face, but he's not a kid anymore. So for the rest of that trip, I let that inform me, and he, rather than being quiet when we were out with my friends, if I shut up, he had the table laughing. My brother is hilarious. He's a funny, charming guy, and I just never noticed because I never shut up to give him the space to talk. So in letting me win that fight, my brother showed me how much he loves me. And from that point on, that's when we really started to have our adult relationship. That's when we started to have real conversations. That's when I learned how to respect my brother. And it wouldn't have happened if he wasn't a bigger man at 16 than I was at 19. So I guess the lesson that I take from this is it's important to value the roles we're in. I will always value being his big brother. I will always hold on to that piece that will want to hurt somebody who hurts him. But I won't let that define who he is. I won't let my protectiveness of him diminish him. And because of that, I get to have a relationship with an awesome guy. So remember that in your own families. Remember that with the people that are important to you. Don't let your protective roles, your need to keep them safe, make them smaller. Thanks so much for listening to this story today. I really enjoy telling these stories. It means the world to me that you're taking a minute and sharing these wonderful moments. If you enjoy them, remember you can always find more on iTunes, Spotify, and CastBox. If you are enjoying them, please take a minute and subscribe. Also, if you are curious about what I'm doing or what episodes are coming up or want to see the videos introducing the episodes, please take a minute and like empoweredchange.c.e on Facebook. More information there is about the episodes, as well as articles and other useful items that I find helpful in my practice in my life. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.